Hello and welcome back to another video. Thank you for your patience and welcome back to the channel. I am officially done with my wisdom teeth removal surgery. And yes, it still is a little bit hard to speak, and I still stumble all of my words a little bit because I have 4 stitches down here as we're speaking right now. I just want to hop on here to say thank you for all the good vibes from the comment sections. Thank you for all the good wishes from you guys in the community post section. And I will be officially back next week to basically extend or expand on what we talked about this week. And this week, we're going to play you a clip that I've recorded in late 2024. So basically, at the end of 2024, I had this idea of covering some of the basic theories in literary theory, which was my specialization when I was writing my thesis or when I was in academia. And I think to myself, some of these theories are simply amazing. And some of these theories really do explain some of the problems and troubles that we're having with reading. So these videos are going to be significantly longer than some of my usual spiel. And they're going to give you some more in-depth understanding and applicable exercises for you to really apply them to your own reading life. So now I think with each video, we're going to aim for depth instead of breadth. So we're still going to have breadth, but a lot of the videos that are going to be upcoming, including the one that I'm drafting right now as I'm recovering, these are going to be longer videos, but the end goal here is to give you a comprehensive understanding of literary theory and how that impacts your daily reading, and to jump from merely giving you guys techniques to a more robust understanding of how to be the most well-educated, well-read critical thinker ever. And this is something I've been thinking about for a little while. How do I present these intricate concepts in some accessible format? So throughout this series, we're going to cover everything. So beginning today, we're going to cover a concept called paranoid reading. So paranoid reading, as I'll go on to explain, is a very significant foundational concept that you need to understand for you to start engaging with literature without being biased and closed-minded. So listen close. This is going to be a very long one. So grab some popcorn with you. Get your YouTube comments ready. I am ready to receive all your essays in the YouTube comment section down below. And then again, thank you for sending me all the well wishes, and thank you for giving me a lot of time to recover from this surgery. So without further ado, this is the discussion and video on paranoid reading, and this is going to be part 1 of a longer series on diving deep into literary theory. I'll see you on the other end, and I'll see you with a new video next week. For now, this is the video. All right, welcome back to another episode, and today I'm super excited to explore with you guys this topic of closed-mindedness. And I know this is quite a sensitive topic, so prepare yourself. This is going to be a bit of a longer one. I'm going to try my best to present a steelman version of this root cause of closed-mindedness. And this is going to draw from my research experience in literary theory, and this is going to draw from various sources, and it's going to combine a lot of my recent thinking on this topic, and I'm going to present it in a way that's as delicate as possible, but also I'm not going to hold back from pointing out this problem, because it is the case, even as someone who's been educated in universities, which is traditionally a left-leaning institution, I've also noticed this recent shift in how public discourse is carried out. We cannot get into a serious discussion anymore without either side pulling out their pitchforks, without either side sort of calling the other side names, or without either side presenting a straw man of the other side. So, you can plug and play whatever political situation you're in. In Australia here, it's like the classic Labor versus Liberal, the Labor Party versus the Liberal Party. And in America, of course, it's the Democrat versus Republican. So both sides have their sort of, it seems to be the case that both sides are really finding it hard to get along. And this notion of bipartisanship, or this notion of being a centrist, is really getting a bad rep. So there's this idea of, like, if you're centrist, if you don't perfectly lean toward our camp, we're gonna call you names like you are betraying us. You're a heretic. You're not perfectly aligned with the radical right. Well, screw you. If you're not perfectly aligned with the radical left, well, we're going to cast you out of the group. Without realizing that most people who are living their day-to-day lives are sort of leaning one way or another, or they have certain aspects of both spectrums. So it's a false dichotomy that we're really drawing here. Of course, certain people have certain values that align with either side, but if we really have to be honest about it, we all carry traces of each. And to deny that you have traces of both sides, or to deny that you have certain qualities that make you more conservative in certain areas of your life, but more liberal or more left-leaning in other areas, is to deny how complicated and messy we are as human beings. So today's discussion is really going to be grounded in that fact of we are more complicated than simply being left-leaning or right-leaning. We are more complicated than simply having a label as, I vote Labor, or I vote Liberal, or I vote Democrat, or I vote Republican. And especially with the recent tense political discourse, how do we make sense of this thing where, it's getting to the point where it's impossible. It's impossible to bring out a sensitive topic into the foyer of discussion without some kind of uproar, without some kind of either side pulling out their pitchforks. So that's what we're gonna explore in this episode. So let's start from the very beginning, which is with a very interesting turn in the history of literary criticism. So in 1996, a very controversial novel by the name of Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace was published. And a lot of people reacted with fervent enthusiasm, but while other people have reacted with visceral disgust. Because the book deals with some quite heavy themes, and if you've read it yourself, it's one of these really polarizing books. You either love it, or it's the kind of meme where if you see Infinite Jest on some guy's desk, or if you see Infinite Jest on a guy's bedstand or a bedside table, run, right? So it's a very divisive book. And in one of the articles published in 2016 by Amy Hungerford, Professor Amy Hungerford, in the Chronicles of Higher Education, she actually sort of articulated a position that was completely unique, or it's completely unheard of. She might have articulated it better, but it has been a thing that's been floating around a literary discourse for a little while. She basically made the case that there's a way to engage with literature by not engaging with it. So in a sense, criticism, in traditional literary criticism, no matter what your opinions are about the book, you kind of have to read the book as a literary critic, and then you draw your kind of conclusions from the book. But then Hungerford presented this argument where, in certain cases, to not read or to retain the right not to read a book, that in itself is also a valid way of engaging with this piece of literature. So, and now we run into this kind of discourse where to negate something in itself can also have a critical significance, or the act of refusing to engage with something in itself could be seen as a political act. So rather than having something that you have to put forth, or rather than playing to this whole rhetoric of we have to engage with it before we draw conclusions, now it is actually possible to not engage with something and view that as a form of valid engagement. So quite interesting. So we moved from engagement first, conclusions later, or engagement, discourse, conclusion, to making up our minds before we've even engaged with the thing. And I'm willing to wager the main argument of this video is that the reason why people are so close-minded, and the reason why it's so hard to have a valid discussion with someone with radically different ideas and opinions, is that deep down, we're all engaging, or we're slowly starting to engage with this mechanism where we too are sort of like prejudging something before we have enough information. We're prejudging a situation without seeing how the other side is presenting their arguments. We prejudge a situation where we're kind of like projecting a conclusion before even engaging with any of the information coming from the other side. So the political leanings aside, both sides do this, so I'm not favoring either camp, and you can plug and play the examples in your head. And in fact, we're going to do a bit of a thought experiment here in a second to really demonstrate how deep this problem goes, because it's the kind of thing where now you're probably getting your pitchforks ready. You're ready to write me comments like, okay, yeah, of course, the other side is full of shit. Of course, they're doing this thing where they're projecting their conclusions upon us without understanding where we're coming from. So both sides do this thing. So there's a really poignant term, and it's a bit complicated to explain, but I'm gonna, in the spirit of explaining everything in common sense, in the spirit of not obscuring anything with jargon, there's a very special term that was invented in the late 20th century called paranoid reading. Let me repeat that, paranoid reading. So at first, we can attach a lot of labels to being paranoid. And in fact, we're going to break down this label. The rest of this video is going to be about what paranoid reading implies and how do we take this concept of paranoid reading into this discussion of how to sort of like break out of this partisanship angle, how to start to think about things in terms of a moving system with different moving parts instead of just sticking with your perspective. So paranoid reading was mentioned based on my research in two founding texts that really articulated what paranoid reading is all about. One is from a 2003 collection called Touching Feeling by the academic and scholar Eve Sedgwick. And the second source is Richard Hofstadter's 1964 essay called The Paranoid Style in American Politics. So if you want to sort of go into the source, I wouldn't really recommend it because these papers are really technical. It's the kind of thing where they have a simple idea, but they just have to run on for like 20 pages to really explain the thing. But based on my academic training, I was able to make sense of it. So here is like the good faith version, a retelling of this reading. So in case I misread anything, in case you've also read this paper and you have certain thoughts about this topic, leave me paragraphs down below. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think of these two sources of readings. So anyway, here is where we're going to start our thought experiment. So within these two essays, a vision for paranoid reading was articulated. And so the argument was there's been a fundamental shift in how we engage with information. Not just content. At the time, it might have been books or newspaper. It might have been different sources of media. But nowadays, social media is sort of like ramping this whole thing on an exponential scale. So it started off quite shallow, but then now it's shooting straight up. So we're kind of approaching that point where we can no longer have a valid discussion with one another. So I think the discussion on paranoid reading is more important than ever. So to really illustrate what paranoid reading means, I'm going to list out the 5 defining features of paranoid reading. And as I'm explaining these defining features, I want you, as a thought experiment, to bring to mind someone in your life who is engaging with this paranoid style of reading or paranoid style of engaging with the world around them. So let's begin. So the key defining characteristic of paranoid reading is that, number 1, paranoid thinking or paranoid reading has to have an absolute enemy. Paranoid thinking and paranoid reading has to have an absolute enemy. So there's a very clear through line in terms of like, okay, here's a news publication that I don't quite agree with. So there's an enemy, right? It's either like, this nutcase publication is publishing all the things that are not factual. They're publishing fake news. Or this nutty left-wing publication is publishing all the wrong things. It's, preaching all the wrong values to our society. So either side could have these arguments, but paranoid reading presumes that there's a side that is wrong. There's a side that is the enemy. So bring to mind someone in your life that does this. Do they tend to cast a strong kind of enemy in their heads? Is it the newspaper publications? Is it a certain talk show host? Is it a certain politician? So in their minds, there's some sort of like absolute enemy, some absolute villain. And this creates a kind of dichotomy between them and the villain that they're trying to fight. And paranoid style thinks that it's its job to correct that wrong. So the paranoid style usually have, very firm and very sort of like moral and righteous indignations. It's like the other side is absolutely wrong, and it is up to the paranoid reader to right that wrong. It is up to the paranoid reader to take up arms or use whatever means is necessary to correct that wrong. So that's the first characteristic of paranoid reading. So it also applies to, we don't just have to talk about these, really heavy political topics, it can also apply to something quite benign, like a novel. Maybe there's an author that you really hate. Maybe there's an author that you're like, this David Foster Wallace guy, he's an asshole, so I'm gonna not read him. He in my head, he's the enemy. He's the enemy to the literary establishment, and all his followers deserve to, I don't know. It's my job to eradicate all his followers or the values that his followers stand for. So there's this kind of, us and them kind of mentality that shows in paranoid reading. So before you even engage with the text already, you've already made up your mind about who the enemy is. And again, bring to mind a person in your life who's doing this. And that leads us to this really interesting characteristic. The paranoid reader thinks that everyone else is deluded, right? They think, it's either the other side is always deluded. People who like this novel or this author, they're deluded. They're trapped in their own little bubbles. If only they can step out of their bubbles, they can see the way I see things. And that's going to lead us to the second characteristic of paranoid reading or paranoid thinking, is that paranoid thinking and reading always anticipates. Paranoid reading and thinking always anticipates, or it projects into the future. So there's a really important point here, which is that temporality, or how we perceive time, is entirely reversed. So instead of perceiving a novel linearly, or instead of engaging with a piece of content linearly, where you kind of start from the beginning, finish the content, make up your mind, and then say what you think of it, you jump into the future. You anticipate the text to do bad things to you. You anticipate this piece of content to do bad things to you. And you sort of anticipate that there's going to be some nasty surprise hiding in there. So your response, instead of embracing the surprise, or instead of embracing some potential validity from the other side, immediately you jump to the conclusion of like, I need to arm myself. I need to arm myself with counter arguments. I need to arm myself with statistics and evidence. I need to arm myself with all sorts of ways to protect myself from this anticipatory harm. So bring to mind something that you sort of listed on your blacklist of something that you'll never consume. Well, maybe like I said, maybe it's a talk show host, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's a banned novel, or maybe it's a book that you swear to God you will not read ever again. I personally definitely had a few of those books on my blacklist, and I'm sort of like calling myself out here. I too have this sort of desire to make up my mind first, so this book doesn't surprise me, so I'm never proven wrong. So it's really interesting that in Sedgwick's definition, she basically called these tendencies of reading, she called them an affinity for symmetry. So in a sense, you want your conclusion to be right. You want your hypotheses to be right so much so that you're willing to disregard the actual substance of the thing. So then again, we're reversing temporality. Before engaging with a thing in good faith, we're leaping ahead to prevent bad surprises from happening. So in a sense, before you even engage with a thing, we're already kind of like, I'm ready to take you on. And this is piggybacked off of the first characteristic of paranoid reading, which is you have to view that thing as an enemy, and then you jump ahead of the text to prevent surprises from getting to you because you cannot be paranoid enough. And there has to be no bad surprises. And that's going to lead us to the third characteristic of paranoid reading, which is paranoid reading already has its mind made up. So this is basically a natural consequence of the second characteristic, which is you have to jump ahead of the text to prevent bad surprises. God forbid, if I truly immerse myself in the text, if I really give myself into this piece of content, what if I change my mind? What if I look like an idiot? What if I'm humiliated? So in order to counteract that potential risk of being wrong, because as human beings, we never want to be wrong. So if you're in a relationship, in my personal relationship with my partner now, those moments are so agonizing. Those like silly moments when you realize, holy shit, I am wrong. And you kind of have to lick your wounds and you sort of like really have to right your wrongs. Those are some of the most humiliating moments, but at the same time, we grow from those moments. At the same time, instead of just having our minds made up, just in there to win an argument. Sometimes it is good to be surprised. Sometimes it is good to not know how a certain novel might influence you, to not know how, how a certain piece of content will influence you. And in a sense, you have to, in order to counteract the other side, and in order to make up your mind before you engage with a piece of content, you have to, in a sense, build a straw man of the other side. And in technical language, this is called a mimetic desire. So you have to kind of mimic how they act. You kind of have to have a mental image of like how the other side would act. So before they can even hit you with the argument, you've already rehearsed this argument in your head 10 times over. So a really prime example, when you have an author that you don't really like, say that you go to this author's signing event. Of course, before you go, in your head, you're already rehearsing how this author is going to speak to you. And you already have all the counter arguments already in your head. So this is something called a mimetic desire. And it always sort of like projects your own inner workings upon the other person. And to the end extreme, paranoia is in a sense pretending that you can read the other person's mind. Like they have to be that way. They have to be. It really is the case that they're thinking these twisted thoughts. And of course, it's my job to right that wrong. So as you can see, as we dive into more and more layers of this paranoid instinct of reading, it really is the case that all these characteristics are interconnected. You don't like a certain thing, you make up your mind, you mimic the other person to prevent sort of like counter arguments, and you pretend that you can read the other person's brain in order to further cast them as an enemy of yours. So that's the third characteristic of paranoid reading, because paranoia or paranoid thinking already has its mind made up, and it has to mimic the other side to prevent the other side from ever speaking. And a fourth characteristic of paranoid thinking and reading is that paranoid thinking and reading hates, absolutely despises anomalies. And this plays into the earlier part where we talked about how paranoid reading is always trying to get ahead. Paranoid reading is always trying to maintain a certain kind of theoretical symmetry. It's trying to maintain the consistency of your idea. It's trying to maintain your worldview so your worldview doesn't get disturbed. In the context of like, for example, fighting with your partner, you don't like the fact that your worldview sometimes needs to be challenged for you to grow. And of course, in an open forum of a discussion or of some really, really contentious topics, you don't want to go in with the potential fear that you might get your mind changed. So as soon as there's an anomaly, as soon as someone pokes a hole in your logic, the paranoid reader is completely thrown off their game. And what you're going to realize is that there's going to be this desperate attempt to maintain their theoretical symmetry. They're going to start to pull out pitchforks. They're going to start calling names. They're going to start to like do anything they could to maintain their symmetry, instead of just being open to new ideas, instead of being open to having their minds challenged or their potential ideas altered. Paranoid reading has this just instinctive sense. Any anomaly is bad. There has to be no bad surprises, and we cannot stand that potentially tomorrow I might think like a different person, because I don't think you realize how connected your identity is with your ideas. If your ideas are disturbed, that's in a sense an alteration of your identity. So that's quite scary. So as you can see, as these four characteristics interlock with one another, it creates a perfect self-reference bubble. It creates a perfect echo chamber where you sort of like, you make an enemy out of a thing, a quick recap, and a second characteristic, you anticipate the other side to do something bad to you, and then you think in a sense of like, you already have your mind made up. You mimic the other side, and in the fourth characteristic, you hate anomalies because you hate being proven wrong. What if someone who you think is an asshole started to behave really nicely towards you? In high school, there are these kind of like popular kids, and you tend to make up certain assumptions about these kids. But one day, one of them like comes up to you and says hi. That kind of destroys your whole conception of who you are in relation to those kids. So one of these really benign moments is a moment of like, are you gonna let that evidence destroy your conception of the other side? Or are you going to maintain your opinions, which is like, he's still an asshole, he's just being nice today, tomorrow, he's going to be different. I'm ultimately right. And ultimately leads us to the fifth and a final characteristic of paranoid reading, is that paranoid thinkers place a lot of faith in exposure. Paranoid thinkers and readers place a lot of faith in exposure. So going off of the previous point, if you don't like to have your mind changed, then where is your intellectual energy going to be directed towards? Of course, you want to unmask the other side. Remember that earlier point of like you think the other side is always deluded. You think, those people who are into that author, for example, those people mired in a cult of Donna Tartt, they're all deluded into this kind of crazy behavior. And then it is my job to start revealing the truth to these people. It's my job to start preaching to the choir. This is how you should actually engage with literature. And this is all the things that's wrong with the subculture of dark academia, just as a throwaway example. And let me show them what the real deal is, the real thing, the truth is. So this is a classic characteristic because your intellectual energy has to go somewhere. When you're kind of mired in a self-reference loop of making up your mind before you have sufficient data, of like having this paranoid tendency to anticipate future surprises, your intellectual energy has to find an outlet. It has to find an outlet in exposing what the other side is up to. And the other side, in a sense, is always, they're always kind of behind the scene. There's a hidden something. There's a hidden force behind the thing. So, and there's certain secrets that are not revealed. And because you can't really comprehend that perspective, hence, you try to make up a story in your mind about how the other side is secretly doing things, how the other side is, secretly getting up to things that you don't quite like. And we can draw so many political comparisons, but then again, this is not a political talk show. This is this is a YouTube channel where we get together to think about interesting ideas. But I'll let you plug and play your examples, and I'll let you plug and play all the ramifications of these characteristics of a paranoid reader/thinker. So, just a quick recap. 5 characteristics of paranoid reading or paranoid thinking. Number 1, it makes an absolute enemy. Number 2, paranoid thinking is always anticipating something in the future, always anticipates that the other side is going to strike them before they strike the other side. And as a result, paranoid thinking has its mind already made up. So it's ready to strike and mimics how the other side is going to act towards them to come up with a potential solution. And to its extreme, the paranoid thinker thinks that they can read the other person's mind. And number 4, paranoid thinking doesn't like to be proven wrong. It doesn't like anomalies. It doesn't like things that would challenge their worldview. And last of all, paranoid thinkers place a lot of faith in exposure. So if they are completely convinced that the other side is wrong, and it is now their job to unveil the hidden things that are happening behind the scene, the hidden kind of mumbo jumbo that's going on, the delusion of the other side. So those are the key characteristics of paranoid thinking. And I told you to bring to mind a person who engages in this kind of behavior. And there's going to be an interesting twist. So have this person in your mind. Who is it? Is it your uncle who you dread to see every Christmas? Is it someone who returned? Is it Jenny who returned from college? Is it that really annoying hairdresser who wouldn't shut up about politics? Who is it? Bring to mind one of these people. Do you have that person in mind? Good. Here's an interesting twist. As I'm talking about these characteristics of being a paranoid reader, notice in the process of assigning this label of being a paranoid reader to another person, you're engaging in the same mechanism of paranoid reading. You're engaging in the exact same mechanism of paranoid reading. We'll explain this after a brief intermission. I'm just going to grab a drink of water. We'll be right back because my camera's actually running out of juice. So I'll charge it and we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Give me 1 second. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Have you been processing that insight? So as you are pointing your finger at these people who you think are paranoid readers, they fit the descriptions a little bit too perfectly. They fit this kind of anticipating the future a little too perfectly. Notice that as you draw that conclusion, as you label someone else a paranoid thinker, as you label someone else as a deluded person, as a paranoid kind of nutcase, you yourself is engaging in the very same mechanism. So number one, you've labeled that person as an enemy, or subconsciously, enemy has different shades of grays. It can be someone you disagree with, in a very subtle way. You can label that as an enemy, or someone that you just really don't like. You can also have that as an enemy. So notice that you've labeled this person an enemy who you've brought to mind when I tell you to bring someone to mind. And second of all, you, in a sense, have anticipated what this person's going to do next time you see them. Now I have this vocabulary of paranoid reading. Now I can explain to them how they're paranoid. Now I can explain to this person how their opinions are wrong because Robin told me, there's this thing called paranoid reading. And third of all, you've already got your mind made up. The minute that I told you to bring someone to mind who kind of acts in this way, you already have your mind made up. You've already categorized a person or this person in your head into that category of being someone who is engaged with this kind of paranoid thinking. And of course, you don't like to have your you don't have to have your conclusions torn apart, which is exactly what I'm doing now. Which is to show you that as you're labeling or as you're attributing these paranoid instincts to another person, you yourself is engaging in the very same process. And finally, it might be the case that this video has armed you with some kind of language and vocabulary to really think about this problem deeply. And you might even have the urge to next time go out there when you're having a fierce political discussion to tell someone else that, you're a paranoid reader. And you're going to start citing all these papers and you're going to start to prove how they're wrong and you're right. And that is you placing faith in exposure. So quite interesting. And that's sort of exactly my original point. It is not the case that it's becoming more and more difficult for us to have a political discussion. It's not the case that either side have some it's not the case that either side's got this it's like they're both brainwashed, or either side they've got invalid arguments. In fact, both sides of, I don't know what kind of debate you're into. Usually, both sides carry shades of truth and shades of lies. So it is up to you to distinguish those things, and it's up to you to notice the contradictions in your own arguments as well as their arguments to have a good faith exchange. And the reason why we can't really express opinions, or the reason why we can't really have a good faith discussion anymore, is because these principles of how the human mind works, they're always in the background. They're always operating, and the sneaky sense, these 5 sneaky characteristics, they're always at play, and they're subconsciously stopping us from putting aside our own biases, putting aside our own kind of preconceived notions, and putting aside all the straw men we've built in our backyards to have an exchange. So in a sense, it's a perfect mechanism, is as perfect as a strange loop. So you think of a thing, and you find evidence for the thing. So this is basically a more advanced version of confirmation bias. So if we don't somehow find out a way to overcome this paranoid tendency, I'm afraid we can never ever have a sensible discussion with each other. And one of my main motivation with this channel, and in fact, I'm personally very inspired by a lot of you guys in the audience, which is I see so many groups of people in my comment section down below. We have religious people, we have sort of your run-of-the-mill liberal arts college students. We have people in their 70s telling me how much they've appreciated my content. We have people, I even had this, I don't know, just for the sake of anonymity, I even had this kid who's a fundamentalist Christian, and he was asking me something about how do I engage with literature without potentially getting my readings corrupted by radical 20th century theory. And I basically told him, look, you need to find a different way in. Maybe what you're comfortable with is interpreting the text that you're already familiar with. So maybe start with the scriptures, the religious scriptures. So the point here is there's so many different perspectives that I'm forced to be exposed to. every day as I'm doing this job, as I'm kind of presenting new ideas to you guys, that at some point taking a partial perspective on a problem becomes untenable. Taking a partial perspective on a problem, frankly, becomes quite anti-human in my mind, because at least to me, I've hit upon an essential human need for education, human need to expand their minds, and human need to see beyond their immediate vicinity. And it somehow penetrated so deeply that, people in my comment section down below, there's really any political discussions going on. And it seems to be the case that everyone's putting aside their differences for this overall goal of recapturing their curiosity, because we've all lost this curiosity in some form or another as we're being funneled through schooling, as we're being funneled through university. So it's kind of like a full circle moment where I've been through the whole university system, but now these certain conclusions are starting to make sense to me. And I'm very happy to share these conclusions with you guys. And I think the ultimate solution, I don't have a solution or a solid solution yet, is that somehow we need to start to notice that we're doing this. Notice that we are, in fact, engaging with these paranoid instincts, and somehow put them aside for the sake of tapping into the one thing that we all share, which is that as human beings, we're all curious creatures. As human beings, we all have a need to understand a larger world beyond us. We all have a need to pursue whatever it is that makes our lives better. And it all boils down to one thing, which is understanding the world around you. All boils down to one thing, which is education, which I think is a universal, which is a universal human right. And then no institution, and no affiliations or none of the stuff should take away that fundamental human right. And I think it's partly my mission to really deliver these subtle thoughts, thoughts with shades of gray to you guys, for you guys to have a more nuanced and more advanced understanding of everything around you. So that is my ultimate vision. And that's why I was so excited to record today's episode, which is to expose, or which is to kind of give a language to this thing that you might have felt at some point in your life, that you might have spotted in other people, and to recognize that this is the mechanism at work. This is the mechanism that's barring us away from speaking with each other in good faith. And if you notice it, and if I start to notice it in myself, and if Uncle Watson starts to notice it in himself around a Christmas dinner table, then a world will slowly start to become a better place. We'll slowly come back together as human beings capable of a solid conversation. Bit of a longer one today. Hope you guys have enjoyed this longer episode, and look forward to more of these deeper dives in the future. So I think my research is only getting deeper from this point, and I have some really interesting news to share. And actually, as you're watching this video right now, I am on vacation. And after my vacation, I'll be back near the end of December, and I just have so much stuff to tell you guys, so many interesting new projects coming up, and I can't wait to catch you guys up to speed. Anyway, for now, Robin Waldun here. Hope you guys have enjoyed this longer episode, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, and goodbye.